everyone, this is Dustin for iPoker VIP, and I'm going to be reviewing a session I played a little while ago at 200 NL on Black Chip Poker. Throughout the video, I'll be referring to the table on the upper left as table 1, upper right as table 2, bottom left as table 3, and bottom right as table 4. And I guess while we have some dead time, I'll just briefly go over my HUD. It's pretty elaborate, and I don't necessarily recommend that everyone has a HUD with this many stats on it, but just so you kind of know what's going on. Well, first, real quick, let me talk about this King 8 suited hand. We get an open from the button, and we are sitting on the big blind with King 8 suited. This, depending on the player, I think all three options can be fine, either folding, calling, or 3-betting. And one thing I really emphasize to students is to have a plan, have a post-flop plan starting pre-flop. And in order to do that, you really need to look at your opponent's post-flop stats in order to make the best pre-flop decisions. So obviously, this player has a wide opening range from the button. This 52 right here is raise first in from late position, so he's opening super wide. So I think that rules out a fold because our hand is just doing pretty well against a 52% opening range. So then our options become 3-bet or call. I don't really want to play a 3-bet pot out of position with this hand. So if we decided to 3-bet, it would need to be as a bluff, and I would want to get him to fold. And we see he's only folding 50% to 3-bets, which is what this number stands for down here. But even if he did fold a lot to 3-bets, I want to take a look at a couple other of his post-flop stats, namely his c-bet flop stat, which is represented by the 70 right here, and which is pretty high. So this means he's going to be c-betting probably too many flops. And then this 100% down here shows that how often he folds to raises on the flop. So the reason that I chose to flat here was because I think I can get more value by check raising a lot of flops, just because he's going to put in an extra bet on the flop and then just fold to my check raise. Now granted, this isn't the best board to be check raise bluffing on, just because it's pretty wet and most players aren't going to be bet folding this super often. But just because this player has such a high c-bet percentage, and also I kind of want to get into a dynamic with him and kind of see how he reacts to check raises on the flop. Plus, I can represent a really strong range. This board hits my range pretty hard. I'm going to have a lot of like broadways. Maybe I can rep pocket 5s and jack 10 and stuff. And so I opt to go ahead and go for the check raise. I don't mind check folding either, but I think this is going to be slightly profitable, and our opponent does end up folding. And that's actually going to be kind of a theme of this video. I think that I check raise a decent amount just throughout this short session that I played. So we'll get into some more spots like that. We get no action with our aces, of course. So anyway, real quick, I'll go over the HUD. It's up here for future reference, but we have VPIP, PFR, raise first in from early position, raise first in from late position, and fold big blind to steal at the top. Second line, we have 3-bet from the blinds, 3-bet from late position. I find it really helpful to distinguish between these two stats, because some people like never 3-bet from late position, but 3-bet a lot from the blinds, as we see like this player, 00x200. Then we have 4-bet after raising but not attempting to steal, and then 4-bet after attempting to steal. And then we have steal from the small blind. Moving on, the third line we have c-bet flop, c-bet turn, fold to flop c-bet, fold to turn c-bet, check raise flop, check raise turn. And the final line we have fold to 3-bet, fold to 4-bet, fold to flop raise, fold to flop check raise, went to showdown, and no hands. And one thing I actually want to talk about real quick is this third line. Like I said, c-bet flop, c-bet turn, fold to flop, c-bet, fold to turn, c-bet. A lot of players have these stats, either don't have these stats at all, and I think they're important stats, or they have them in a different order. And I think I really like this order specifically, mainly because when, let's say someone opens under the gun and you flat from the button, the two stats you're going to want to be looking at on your opponent's HUD are their c-bet flop and c-bet turn stats to see how often you can float, how often you can bluff raise, etc. How, like, when you should just fold the flop. And it's just helpful to have those stats right next to each other. And on the other hand, when you're the pre-flop raiser, the two stats you're going to want to be looking at on your opponent's HUD are their fold to flop c-bet and fold to turn c-bet. And so it's just really helpful if those two stats are right next to each other. So hopefully that makes sense. I choose to open king-jack off from middle position. I won't always open it, but I think that I have a big enough edge on most of these tables to make it a profitable open. Not a ton happening up here. I remember up on table 2, this was kind of not a super fun table to be at, just because the two players behind me were pretty aggressive with their 3-betting and kind of like pretty solid players in general. I mean, definitely exploitable, but not super fun players to have behind me. So I kind of had to tighten up my range here from like the cutoff and middle position. But obviously, pocket aces are strong enough to open from middle position. And we get no action again. Now down here on table 4, I think it's pretty close between all the three options. I don't really like folding. I think I can profitably flat here, assuming that I'm capable of leading out on the best flops to do that. But it's not a great spot. I also don't really know how this Mama Bahama person reacts to 3-bets yet, since I don't have a ton of hands, just like 123. So I opt for a squeeze. It's going to look pretty strong, squeezing, middle position open and a button call. And I expect the no money, no foonies range to be capped here, because he'd definitely be 3-betting with really strong hands. So I just go for a squeeze. There's plenty of money to win. I make it probably like 20 bucks. And up on table 1, I decide to ISO this 53-35 player with 9-10 suited. Very standard. If I think I'm going to get 3-bet a lot, I should probably have just made it smaller, like raised to $6 instead of $8. 3-bet by like this player specifically, which it looks like I probably am, since he's 3-betting so much from the blinds and not folding his big blind to steal super often. So maybe a small mistake there, but obviously I'm folding now. And honestly, looking back at that hand now, I still think folding there is best, because there's not like a great chance that he's light, but if I have a good read that he's bluffing there a lot, I could actually flat and plan on raising a lot of his c-bets, just because he's c-betting a super high amount, 87%, and also folding very often to flop raises, 75%. So I think that might have been actually a profitable spot to flat, but without slightly better reads, I opted for just a fold. And again, I assume that I open this hand. Ace-4 off is definitely not a standard open from the cutoff by any means, but we pretty much want to do everything we can to play pots in position against fish in general, at all stakes. And so we have this fish in the big blind who's pretty likely to play a hand with us, which is always going to be good. And also, the ace-4 has a nice blocker where if we do get 3-bet by this guy, we can probably just go for a 4-bet bluff there. But we end up just taking it down. Here we open pocket 7s and fold out of position to a 3-bet. That's pretty standard. And 6-8, again, at some tables I would be opening 6-8 off from the button, but I just think these players are going to play a little bit too well against me, so I'm going to have to tighten up my opening range there. Okay, up on table 1 we have a hand, obviously opening ace-queen. Under the gun, we get a call from this fish, which is great, and we're just going to the plan here pretty much is to bet for value. We definitely want to set up stacks so that we have a pretty easy shove on the river. So I bet 10, which was a little more than 10% of my opponent's stack on the flop. And here I like a bet that's, about 2/3 pot again. So we can set up a really nice 63 into 82 river shove. Flop a wonderful card on the river, and really nothing to do but bet for value. I guess you could check to try to induce something from like missed clubs, but we have the ace of clubs, which reduces some of his flush draws, and the ace came anyway. And so I just think there's more value in betting here, trying to get called by a queen, or maybe he like floated us twice with a hand like ace 10. Maybe he thinks that we're likely to bluff on this card, so we get called by like even a 9 or 10s or jacks, something like that. So very clear bet. Like I didn't really need to spend that much time talking about it. Down here, yeah, we get called by ace jack. Down here, I would ordinarily just call here just because we're getting such good odds and I'm going to be able to donk out on a fair amount of flops. But I just opted for a fold, which it's probably close. And okay, let's see what happened here. Cool, so this is actually the same player that we have over here on the button. And it's the same player who c-bets a lot, 71% on the flop, and so far has folded to all of our flop raises. And so I definitely don't always call with ace-8 off from the line against the button open. Sometimes it's going to be a fold, and sometimes it's going to be a 3-bet. But just because this player has such exploitable flop stats, I decided to, again, look ahead at his post-flop stats to make a call pre-flop. And so this is a pretty good board to check raise. I expect him to be c-betting it a lot, and we have some really nice backdoor equity. There's a fair amount of cards we can barrel on, like a lot of hearts, probably like a queen or higher, maybe a 9, because it gives us a straight draw. But we do expect him to just fold on the flop most of the time, which he does. Up on table 2, we get an open from the small blind. He's opening 50%. I think this is a very clear call. A lot of players I see make the mistake of 3-betting this hand. And when I ask them why, they say because I think he'll fold a lot or something like that. But the fact is, he has such a wide range, and if we flat, we're going to be able to play profitably in position with not a fantastic hand, but a hand that is doing pretty well, especially with position against his range here. He's going to have a lot of worse 9s, like 10-9, 9-8, Jack-9, Queen-9, and a lot of worse kings too. He's probably opening any suited king for sure in this spot, so I just rather flat here and play in position. This player also is c-betting quite a lot, 88%, so I expect him to be c-betting here 100% and then usually just giving up on the turn without anything, or basically with like pocket 10s or worse. And as we see, he's only c-betting the turn 29%, which is very low. And so instead of bluff raising here, I think it's we can risk less by just floating and taking it away on the turn when he checks to us. And down on table 4, pretty standard call pre-flop with the 8s. Then we get squeezed. I think this is another really close spot. Folding might honestly be better, but after thinking about it, I opted for a call. We are not deep, but a little bit deep with the squeezer, and also there's going to be, there's a decent amount of money in the pot already. So if we flop a set, I think we're going to have pretty decent implied odds. Maybe not quite good enough, but I do think it's close and not a big mistake. The problem is we're out of position. Yeah. And then I actually wasn't paying attention to this ace-king hand on table 1, so let's go back. Up on table 2 with the king-9, I did bet the turn as planned, but he called, and so at this point I put him on either like a weak ace that he decides to go into check call mode with, or some kind of jack, and I think it's a profitable bet on the turn because he's going to fold most of the time. But when he calls, I'm just going to give up. I'm definitely not going to try to get him off an ace, and he may or may not fold a jack. So he has a pretty high win to showdown, 32. So I don't even expect him to get him off. I don't even expect to get him off a jack blind versus blind. So I just give up. I think I played that hand pretty well. Up here, I chose to c-bet with ace-king half pot, and basically for value. I think he's going to be floating a lot with a lot of worse aces and pretty much like just a ton of stuff. He doesn't fold that often to c-bets. He's probably going to float here with like jack 10. So that's why I chose to bet up there. And we actually get raised. He is raising the flop a fair amount, it looks like. And I think he's going to be raising with a lot of worse hands. Especially since, yeah, we see his flop raise percentage is 22% over close to 500 hands. And that's really high. So he's going to have mostly bluffs. So I think this is a really clear call. And just kind of try to get to showdown. Maybe even call another bet, because he seems pretty aggressive. So the turn goes check, check. And then this isn't a great river to see. He definitely could have some flush draws for raising the flop and then checking back the turn. And then there's always a chance he could have some random jacks. So a lot of times when people bluff raise this flop, they're not going to bluff anymore if they get played back at. So I'm planning to check, hope to get to showdown, but probably fold if he bets. And he does end up checking back with the flush. I think he probably should have gone for thin value there against like pairs higher better than an 8, but I'm not surprised to see that hand particularly. Okay, so I chose to fold king 8 off from the small blind just because, again, I think this guy's going to give me a lot of trouble in position. He's not even folding a lot to 4-bet, so it's not like I can really 4-bet bluff very profitably. So I just chose to fold. It's definitely on the tighter side, but I think it's fine. I played this session in the morning, and usually games are not nearly as good in the morning as they are later on in the day. So I mean, it looks like we have a pretty big fish on table 1, but other than that, these tables really don't look fantastic. I also wanted to talk about, where did it go? This hand. I was playing another table on a different monitor, and this hand came up, and I just thought it was worth talking about. Let's see if I can actually read it. So I'm in the big blind with ace-6 off. Folds around to the small blind, who pretend we don't know what he has, who raises to $5, and we call. This is kind of a similar spot with the king 9 hand, where a lot of players, I think, make the mistake of just 3-betting without a really great reason. But since this player is going to have such a wide range, we can just call in position with ace-6 and just play. So the flop comes down 10-10-9. Our opponent c-bets. This is, I think, just a call. Our opponent's going to be c-betting their whole range. And I think with ace-high, we're definitely ahead of our opponent's c-betting range on this flop. So choose the call. The turn goes check, check. If our opponent bets again on this turn, I'm probably just going to fold because this jack is not a card that is going to really increase our opponent's fold equity, because when we call this flop, our range has a lot of like 9x, 10x, jack x, stuff like that, and the jack just connects with the board so well that I don't think he's going to bluff it very often. So he does check the turn, and I decided to just check it back in case he's pot controlling with 9x or something like that. I think we're usually ahead. Just try to get to showdown. And then and then we see on the river he bets $14. And I think this is just a really easy call with ace high. Obviously we have like jacks and tens with an ace. Our opponent would probably be betting the turn, definitely with any 10, but pretty likely with a jack too. So, and then another jack pairing on the river makes it less likely as a jack. So pretty straightforward hand, but I do see people at micro stakes misplaying it here. So that's that. Here on table 1 with the ace jack, we go ahead and isolate the fish again, and we get a call. Here I don't actually remember what I did, and I don't hate just checking back and trying to get to showdown. This fish is playing such a wide range, and this board is actually going to hit his limping range fairly well. So I think I just prefer to check back and see a free card, and it looks like I do the opposite. I bet pretty small, I guess, because I thought he was going to be calling me so wide. So I value bet here with ace jack, and he ends up over shoving, which obviously we can't call when we're this deep. So I do think c-betting there was a mistake against that player. Here we open king 7 suited from the cutoff. A little bit light, but I think profitable in certain spots. Obviously c-bet with top pair and get a fold. Down here we isolate this limper with ace 7. Okay, so hopefully I c-bet this flop. When people limp, especially when when players limp and they're not playing like 50+% of hands, their limping range is usually going to be something like small pocket pairs, suited connectors, and like some suited aces. And so king high board, like they have very few kings in their limping range, which means that king high boards are the perfect boards to bluff post flop, like both in limped pots or if someone limp calls. So I really hope I c-bet here. Oh, did I check? That was bad. I wasn't thinking super clearly while I was playing this session, but I did end up checking. When he bets pot here, I think that it's going to be a call. Like we said, he probably does not have a king, so his range is really polarizing when he bets here. I think he's going to have a lot of draws and just complete air, because we looked weak when we checked back the flop. So I just chose to call now that I picked up a pair and I still have ace high. And all the draws missed. I don't think there's any value in betting here. I'm going to choose to just check it back and usually win. He did show up with the nuts, pretty much, on the turn at least. So I just ran kind of bad there. Down here with the eights, let's see what happened on the flop. Obviously we flat, and we check call the flop. This is going to be very standard. So the reason we check the flop is because we expect our opponent to be c-betting most of the time, and we expect to be ahead of their range. So we can comfortably we can comfortably check and expect to get a bet from them and call it. On the turn, though, especially when it's an undercard and we don't really expect our opponent to be bluffing anymore, I think this is a pretty decent spot to just donk out, because we can get value from a lot of flush draws that might check back, a lot of worse pairs that might check back. Like I think this player could have a 3 or a 4, or definitely pocket 5s or pocket 6s. And even some overcards might float us here, a hand like ace queen, something like that. So I think this is a clear bet here, and checking here is definitely a mistake that I would say most players make. So I do go ahead and bet. And another point too is that even if he folds a hand like king queen, he probably wouldn't continue to bluff with that hand anyway, especially on this card. So even if we fold out king queen, that's good because he's not going to put any more money in unless he hits a king or a queen. So there's just a lot of good reasons to be betting here with eights. And up here we flat from the small blind with king queen suited. And I choose to donk out here. This is a pretty standard play. The board's fairly wet. We can get value from worse pairs and worse kings, but I don't think enough players have a donking range at all, which is something that's super important to think about, especially in three-way pots or multi-way pots in general. You should be donk betting a lot more often than in heads-up pots. And with pocket tens down here, I made a standard c-bet for value. Here with the ace-3, if this player had a deeper stack, then it's an easy call. And maybe I could even call here profitably, but I just didn't really want to play like 15 bigs deep with ace-3, even with position. So I think folding there is probably best. Okay, here on table 4, I decided to open queen-jack off from the cutoff. This is, usually going to be a decent option, but I just want to emphasize that I had a plan for if I got 3-bet, which is super important, especially when you're pretty likely to get 3-bet in this spot. All these players seem to be 3-betting pretty lightly, and so basically my plan, if either of these players 3-bet, was to just 4-bet, because I have really nice blockers to pocket queens, pocket jacks, ace queen, ace jack. So I'm going to get a decent amount of folds by just 4-betting. Plus, if this player chooses to 3-bet with only like 30 big blinds, he's going to probably 3-bet to a size that I have plenty of fold equity against by just 4-bet shoving. And so if that player 3-bets, like if these two players fold and this player 3-bets, then I would just 4-bet jam, because I'm getting an okay price on my bluff, and Queen Jack has not terrible equity against a calling range. If he's going to be calling with hands like pocket 6s or better, and random like aces, like ace 10, even ace king, stuff like that. Obviously we're behind that range, but if you factor in the very large amount of folds we get, in my opinion, then it's going to be a profitable shove. So we go ahead and raise. And as expected, more or less, we do get 3-bet. So instead of freezing up like I see some players do and being like, oh, now what do I do? I got 3-bet, I'm out of position with a pretty bad hand. I already knew I was just going to 4-bet, so no big deal. And he does fold. It's pretty important to have just a solid general game plan, especially against players who are on the fishier side that you kind of want to target at your table. And again, that involves looking at post-flop stats in order to make your pre-flop decisions. So this fish opens from the button. We see that he folds to 3-bet 0% so far. So what that's going to mean for me is that I'm going to be 3-betting a wider range for value. I'm going to start 3-betting stuff like king jack, maybe even queen jack off for value, and just expect him to call with a very wide range. Maybe I'll even 3-bet jack 10 suited for value, just because I think he's going to be calling with hands that are dominated, and he's just not going to play very well post-flop. But I'm not going to 3-bet bluff at all, And with my more marginal hands, I'm just going to want to call to both give myself a chance to play a pot with the fish and try to get his money before someone else at the table does, which is an important consideration. But also, we see this player c-bet 71%, which is a lot, and folds a lot to check raises, 100% so far. So again, I'm just going to go with a plan of flatting and planning on going for a check raise on a decent amount of flops. And I don't think there's anything wrong with check raising this flop. He bet pretty small, which is kind of a sign of weakness, and he's going to be betting this board 100%. It's obviously like pretty low, so it doesn't hit very much of his range at all. And even though it doesn't hit my range at all either, and like I'm not repping a ton by check raising here, it just doesn't matter against this player. He's just looking at his hand and seeing that it does not connect well with the board, and so he's just going to give it up when he faces a raise here. So I'm pretty sure he folds. Up on table 2, I decide this is kind of a loose pre-flop, but again, this player has pretty exploitable post-flop tendencies. He c-bets 86%. He's just opening a really wide range in general, 70% from late position. So I just like I could actually 3-bet here because he's probably going to call too much out of position, but he does seem like he's 4-betting a decent amount as well. So I chose to just flat. And so this is a pretty dry board, so my options are to either float or bluff raise. There's no reason to fold here. Since he's c-betting so often on the flop, but hardly ever on the turn, only 33%, and he's not folding a ton to flop raises, I choose to just float. I'm risking less, and he's usually just going to check fold the turn. Plus, I can pick up some backdoor equity. I have an overcard. I think this is an okay spot to just float. Over here, this was a tough spot on table 1. I opened from the small blind, got called, flopped the nuts, obviously c-bet, and then we got called. The 8 it's not great that we see a diamond, or that the board pairs really, but I think we have to bet again for value. He can be calling with a lot of queen X, like queen 10 with a diamond, king queen with a diamond, ace jack or king jack with a diamond. So I think this is definitely a mandatory bet for value. But then we get raised. And I was put into a pretty tough spot here. I seriously considered folding for a very long time, especially because this is the first time I've ever seen him raise the turn. His raise turn percentage is 0 so far, so I really think when he raises here, he's going to have queen 8 or jack 8, or a flush so often. And he definitely already has all those hands in his range, so I really think this is just a fold. The reason I decided to end up calling is specifically because he hardly ever bets the river. So I only have to pay $37 to win this whole pot of like 150, and so because I do not think that he's ever going to bluff the river after I call here. So I do end up calling, but it's probably a mistake. I should probably just be folding here. And of course he does end up betting the river anyway, so I just fold there. And we get raised on this table too by this player who's also never raised on the turn, a different player. So it's just going to be a fold too. And it might seem like we're getting outplayed in these spots, but I really just think I do think that I made a mistake by not folding the turn here, but we are just kind of running into the tops of people's ranges up on these tables. Now ISO the fish again and just take it down. So we flop the nut flush draw. The fish calls, we flop the nut flush draw and decide to c-bet. And we get raised. I think that this player has a really wide range for raising here. Obviously, he can have some nutted hands like pocket sevens, pocket eights, and queen eight. But I think he's raising here a ton on the flop. He's just raising a ton on the flop in general. So I think he's going to have a lot of worse draws, just like random straight draws, maybe even gut shots. And so I guess it's somewhat close between just getting it in here and calling, but I chose to call just to let him keep bluffing. I actually think I'm ahead here a lot with ace-jack high, so I just chose to call. He's really aggressive on all three streets, so as we see, he's like betting 100% so far on all three streets. So I just choose to call and let him bluff off his stack, and of course, for the times that I am behind, I have a decent amount of equity to improve. So we call the turn as expected, and on the river, he just gives up. I don't really see any point to bet here. We could shove to try to get him off a chop, but I really think we're just gonna, like, he could have a random queen that he's giving up with now, or of course he can have a ton of just stuff that we beat, like 9 high. So I just choose to check it back. And he did show up with queen 10 there, which just means he's like kind of raising everything on the flop. Again, top of the range. So here with the pocket fives, usually fives is kind of a borderline hand, but with small pocket pairs from the blinds when you're facing a button open against a somewhat competent player, it's usually just going to be a 3-bet or fold scenario. Because if you call, you're usually just going to have to check fold the flop. You're not going to have a lot of equity to be like check raise bluffing with, and if you flop a set, it's really hard to get value out of position, especially when you're up against such a wide range. And so I considered 3-betting, but this player only folds 25% to 3-bets, so I just folded fives here. And I just think it's going to be a losing play to do anything else. And this is an easy call in position with king queen suited. And we flop flush draw with 2 overs. Not a bad flop. This player c-bets. When someone c-bets in a 3-way pot, they're usually not going to be light nearly as often as they are in a heads-up pot. So I expect this player to have some kind of hand. I think it's pretty likely he has like a pocket pair that's higher than 3s. That he's just betting for kind of protection and thin value. So I really don't think there's any value in raising here. I definitely do not want to get it in against a pair, or obviously he could have like the nut flush draw here, which I'm not doing well against at all. So I choose to just call in position. And we we turn the flush, which is a great card to see. Here, I guess it's a little bit close between raising and calling, but he just folds so often to raises on the turn, and my hand just looks so strong when I raise here, that I just think I can make a little bit more money by calling and trying to extract some more value on the river. Because if he has a hand like pocket 9s here and I raise, he's just going to fold, whereas on the river he might check call. So I choose to call here. And of course we get the worst card in the deck, another 3, which pretty much counterfeits our flush. So at this point I don't expect him to fold a hand like 9s or any pair. So we just check. I also just wanted to talk about real quick this hand down on table 4. I chose to flat from the small blind with king 7 suited against this short stacker looking guy. largely, again, because of his exploitable flop stats. He's c-betting 77% and folding to flop check raises 100%. So I choose the flat. He c-bets half pot on a very dry board, and I want to raise, and so then the question, just because he's going to fold if he doesn't have anything, but the question becomes how much should I raise? A normal raise size is, I mean, we could raise to maybe like 16 or something, but it's just unnecessary. Really, all we have to do is check min raise here, and we're basically threatening his stack because he has such a short stack. It's going to be really easy to get him all in by the river, and even though we're out of position, I just don't see this kind of player playing back here, and so I think this is a good spot for a check min raise bluff out of position. Largely based on his stats and, most importantly, stack size. So I just wanted to share that. And that's the video. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Feel free to comment with any questions or comments, and I will be back in a little bit with a part 2 to this series. So see you guys.